When someone expects a reaction from you, they hold a certain level of control over your emotions. They believe they have the power to affect your state of mind, to influence your behavior, and to dictate how you feel. This is why so many people use silence as a tool. They understand that withholding attention can create a sense of uncertainty in the other person. But while silence can be powerful, it is also something that people can anticipate. They may assume that after a while you'll break, that you'll eventually reach out, or that you'll be waiting in the background, emotionally invested even if you're physically absent. This is where a deeper level of power comes into play, one that goes beyond simple no contact. It is not about ignoring someone or cutting them off. It is about reaching a point where their actions no longer affect you at all. No reaction is the ultimate reaction because it signifies true emotional detachment. Most people do not understand the difference between simply avoiding someone and genuinely being unaffected by them. Avoidance still carries an emotional charge. It means that on some level, you are still in the game, still concerned with how they perceive you, still invested in the outcome of their actions. True power, however, comes from a place where you are no longer emotionally involved in any way. It is not a performance, not an act of self-restraint, but a fundamental shift in how you view the situation and the person involved. When you reach a point where you are truly indifferent to someone's presence or absence, you become unpredictable. And unpredictability is one of the most unsettling forces in human interaction. People thrive on patterns. They expect you to react the way you always have, to get upset, to seek closure, to demand explanations, to chase, or to respond in some way that reassures them of their own significance in your life. The moment you stop participating in this cycle, they begin to lose their sense of control. They start to question whether they ever had an impact on you in the first place. And that is where the real shift happens. Think about it. Why do people try to push your buttons? Why do they provoke, manipulate, or try to elicit a reaction? Because on some level, they need to know they still have access to your emotions. They need to feel important, to know that they still occupy space in your mind. The moment you give them a reaction, you confirm their relevance. Even if it's anger, frustration, or sadness, it means they still have a degree of control. But when they do something that would have normally triggered you, and you do nothing, not because you're trying to prove a point, but because you genuinely don't care anymore, they are left with nothing to hold on to. The foundation of their control crumbles beneath them. This is not about playing games. It's not about pretending to be detached while secretly hoping for their attention. That kind of behavior is still rooted in emotional dependence. The real strategy is to develop a mindset where they are no longer a significant factor in your life. It's a shift from external focus to internal mastery. Instead of asking, what are they thinking? What will they do next? You begin asking, how do I feel about myself? What do I want out of life? The more you shift the focus inward, the less their actions hold any power over you. When someone who used to trigger strong emotions in you suddenly has no effect, they feel it, even if you never say a word. Your energy changes. Your demeanor changes. The way you carry yourself changes. You no longer move through life with the weight of their influence pressing on your shoulders. This is when they begin to wonder, what happened? Where did your emotional investment go? Why aren't you responding the way they expected? It's a silent transformation that speaks louder than any words ever could. This is why no reaction is the ultimate reaction. It's not just about withholding communication. It's about achieving a state of mind where their actions no longer dictate your emotions. The moment you reach this place, everything changes. People who once thought they had you figured out no longer recognize the person you've become. They realize that whatever power they once had is gone. And that is when the true shift in dynamics occurs. Most people believe that the most effective way to handle a situation where they have been disrespected, hurt, or undervalued is by cutting the person off completely. They believe that by going silent, they are taking back their power, removing themselves from the dynamic, and creating a sense of absence that will be noticed. But the real power does not come from simply disappearing. It comes from redirection. It comes from shifting your energy in a way that completely transforms your life, making the person who once took you for granted realize that they never truly knew you at all. When you go no contact, the focus is still external. The intention is still rooted in making them feel your absence, in creating a void that they will supposedly notice and regret. But the problem with this approach is that it keeps your energy entangled with theirs. You are still operating from a place of reaction rather than creation. You are still in a state of waiting for them to notice, waiting for them to reach out, waiting for them to realize what they lost. And as long as you are waiting, you are not truly moving forward. The real strategy, the one that is even more powerful than simply cutting them off, is to take all of the energy that you would have directed toward them and channel it into something greater. Instead of focusing on what they think, how they feel, or whether they are missing you, you redirect your focus toward building, improving, and evolving. This shift in energy is what creates real transformation. It is what takes you from someone who is defined by their past experiences to someone who is actively shaping their future. People expect you to withdraw when you are hurt. They expect you to disappear for a while, maybe even go silent, but they also expect you to be emotionally stagnant. They assume that your silence is just a pause, a waiting period, a temporary response to pain. But when they finally check back, expecting to find you exactly where they left you, and instead they see a version of you they no longer recognize, that is when the real impact is made. Redirection of energy is what creates the most powerful shift in perception. When someone treats you poorly, they often assume that they have defined your reality in some way. They assume that you will carry the weight of their actions, that you will remain stuck in the dynamic they created. But when you take that same energy and use it to fuel something new, something completely unrelated to them, you shatter that illusion. You break free from the narrative they placed you in, and in doing so, you rewrite the story. This is not about proving a point to them. It is not about trying to make them jealous or make them regret their decisions. It is about realizing that your energy is valuable, that your focus is powerful, and that every ounce of attention you waste on someone who did not value you is attention you could be using to create something incredible in your own life. Instead of going silent and waiting for them to notice, you become so absorbed in your own growth that their absence becomes irrelevant. When you take all of the energy that was once spent on them, whether it was through love, frustration, anger, or even longing, and you pour it into your own personal evolution, you become unrecognizable. You become someone who is no longer shaped by their actions, but by your own decisions. You start working on things that bring you fulfillment. You start investing in your goals. And you start cultivating a version of yourself that is no longer attached to their perception of you. And here is where the power truly lies. When you no longer care whether or not they see the change, they feel it anyway. The energy shift is undeniable. They can sense that something has changed, that they no longer hold the same space in your mind, that they are no longer the center of your thoughts. Even without communication, they begin to notice the distance. Not just physical distance, but emotional distance. The kind that cannot be bridged with a simple message or apology. This level of detachment does not come from simply removing yourself from the situation. It comes from replacing it with something greater. It comes from redirecting every ounce of pain, every moment of doubt, and every lingering attachment into something productive, something fulfilling, something that reminds you of your own worth. And when that shift happens, when you truly step into your own power, the people who once assumed they had an effect on you realize they never really knew you at all. Most people misunderstand emotional detachment. They think it means becoming cold, uncaring, or shutting off their emotions completely. But true emotional detachment is not about shutting down. It is about rising above. It is about reaching a level of self-mastery where no one outside of you has the ability to shake your inner peace. It is about moving past the need to react, past the need to prove anything, past the need to seek validation or revenge. When you master emotional indifference, you are no longer a player in anyone else's game. You have reclaimed control over your own energy, and that is a kind of power most people will never understand. The reason emotional indifference is so powerful is because most people operate from a place of emotional dependency. They rely on external factors to dictate their internal state. They are happy when they receive attention, sad when they are ignored, angry when they are disrespected, and hopeful when they get the slightest sign of validation. Their emotions are a reaction to the world around them, not a reflection of their own inner stability. But when you break free from that cycle, when you reach a point where your emotions are no longer dictated by what someone else does or does not do, you become untouchable. You become someone who cannot be manipulated, baited, or controlled. This does not mean you stop feeling. It does not mean you suppress your emotions or pretend not to care. It means you learn how to process your emotions without allowing them to dictate your behavior. It means you recognize when someone is trying to provoke a reaction from you, and instead of falling into the trap, you remain completely unaffected. When someone insults you, ignores you, or tries to get a rise out of you, and you simply don't care because you genuinely don't, that is when you hold all the power. That is when they realize they no longer have access to your emotions. And that realization is what unsettles them the most. Most people expect a reaction. They expect anger, they expect sadness, they expect you to reach out, to argue, to demand answers, to show that you are still emotionally invested. And as long as you give them that reaction, they know they still hold space in your mind. Even if you try to win by being cold, by blocking them, by going silent, the intention behind your actions is still rooted in emotional attachment. But when you reach true emotional indifference, your actions are not about them at all. You do not go silent to prove a point. You do not avoid them to get a reaction. You simply do not think about them in a way that requires any action at all. This is the ultimate shift when you stop trying to prove your worth to someone. When you stop hoping for closure, for validation, for recognition. When you stop playing the role they assign to you and instead become something they never expected, someone who is completely free. That is when the power dynamic reverses. That is when the people who thought they could control your emotions suddenly find themselves powerless. The reason most people struggle with emotional indifference is because they are still holding on to the idea that they need to prove something. They want to prove they are strong, that they are unaffected, that they have moved on. But the need to prove anything is still a form of attachment. True detachment comes when you no longer feel the need to show anything to anyone. You do not need to post about how happy you are. You do not need to make sure they see how well you are doing. You do not need to prove that you have changed. You just live. You just exist in your own world, focused on your own path, completely unbothered by whether they notice or not. And that is what confuses them the most. They do not know how to react to someone who is no longer reactive. They do not know how to handle someone who does not need their attention, their approval, or their validation. They do not know how to reach someone who has emotionally outgrown them. When you master emotional indifference, you no longer feel the highs and lows that come from external validation. You are no longer waiting for a text, for an apology, for a sign that they still care. You are no longer stuck in the cycle of reacting, overthinking, and analyzing their every move. You are free. And that kind of freedom is rare. It is something most people will never experience because they are too caught up in their emotions, too caught up in seeking control over others instead of themselves. But when you reach that place, when nothing they do or say affects you anymore, everything changes. They begin to realize they no longer have access to you, not just physically, but emotionally. They cannot pull you back into old patterns. They cannot provoke a response. They cannot disrupt your peace. And that is when they finally understand that you have moved beyond them in a way they never saw coming. The reason most people remain stuck in cycles of disappointment, frustration, and emotional pain is because they keep playing the same game with the same rules. They react in ways that are predictable, ways that others expect, and as a result, they keep experiencing the same outcomes. When someone ignores them, they chase. When someone disrespects them, they argue. When someone leaves, they wait. It is a pattern, a loop, and as long as you continue operating within it, nothing changes. But the moment you do something unexpected, the moment you break the pattern, everything shifts. This is where unpredictability becomes your greatest weapon. People expect reactions, and when they do not get them, it throws them off balance. They're wired to anticipate a certain response, to expect emotions to play out in a way they can manage. But when you step outside of that framework, when you refuse to engage in the way they are used to, you become an anomaly. And anomalies are powerful because they cannot be controlled. The truth is, human nature is driven by predictability. People get comfortable with how others respond to them. They learn which buttons to push, which words will elicit a reaction, which actions will get a rise out of you. And as long as you keep reacting the way they expect, you are playing right into their hands. They feel secure in knowing that if they ignore you, you will reach out. If they walk away, you will wait. But when you refuse to follow that script, when you make an unexpected move, they do not know what to do. Suddenly, the control they thought they had disappears. Unpredictability is not about playing mind games. It is not about manipulating situations or trying to confuse people. It is about removing yourself from the equation in a way that forces them to question everything they assumed about you. It is about operating from a place of emotional independence, where their actions no longer dictate your response. When you become unpredictable, you become someone they cannot categorize. Someone who does not fit into the usual patterns of behavior they are accustomed to. And that is unsettling because it means they have lost the ability to influence you. Imagine someone expecting you to be heartbroken, expecting you to beg for their attention, expecting you to linger in the shadows of what once was. But instead of doing any of those things, you thrive. You move in a direction so different from what they expected that it leaves them questioning whether they ever truly knew you at all. This is the power of shifting the dynamic, of refusing to engage in a way that keeps you stuck in a cycle of reaction. Most people believe that silence is enough. They think that by cutting someone off, they are being unpredictable. But silence alone is predictable if it comes with the expectation that the other person will eventually reach out. True unpredictability is when you detach so completely that your actions are no longer influenced by them at all. You do not just stop engaging, you change the entire narrative. You move in a way they never anticipated. You become someone who is not waiting, not wondering, not stuck in old emotions. And that is when they start paying attention. This is why the most powerful move you can make is not just to remove yourself, but to elevate yourself. When someone expects you to be struggling, and instead they see you thriving, it forces them to reassess everything. When they assume you will wait, and instead you move forward without hesitation, it makes them question their own importance in your life. When they believe they still hold a place in your thoughts, and they realize they do not, it shifts the power dynamic entirely. The reason unpredictability works so well is because people hate uncertainty. They need to know where they stand, how much influence they have, whether they still matter. When you remove those answers, when you move in ways they cannot anticipate, they are left in a state of confusion. And in that confusion, they begin to feel something they never expected to feel: doubt. Doubt about their choices, doubt about their actions, doubt about whether they ever truly had control over the situation. The moment someone realizes they no longer understand you is the moment they start questioning everything they assumed. They wonder why their usual tactics are not working. They wonder why you are not reacting the way you used to. They wonder what changed. And in that wondering, they begin to feel a shift. A shift that makes them see you differently, respect you differently, and in some cases even miss you in a way they never saw coming. When you master unpredictability, you break free from the cycle of emotional dependency. You stop giving people the responses they expect. You stop reacting in ways that keep you tied to their validation. Instead, you create a new reality. One where your actions are driven by your own growth, your own purpose, your own sense of self-worth. And in doing so, you make it impossible for anyone to take you for granted again. Most people spend their lives in reaction mode, constantly adjusting their emotions and behaviors based on how others treat them. If someone ignores them, they feel unworthy. If someone praises them, they feel validated. If someone leaves, they feel abandoned. Their emotional state is entirely dictated by external forces, leaving them in a constant state of instability. But the real power comes when you shift from reacting to creating. When you stop being at the mercy of what happens to you and instead take full control of what you are building. When you start focusing on your own path, your own goals, and your own self-improvement, something extraordinary happens. The people who once believed they had control over you begin to realize they do not. They expect you to remain emotionally stuck, analyzing their every move, hoping for their return, or seeking closure. But when you step into creation mode, their influence over you disappears. Because your energy is no longer centered around them. It is centered around building a version of yourself that no longer needs anything from them. The shift from reaction to creation is what separates those who remain trapped in emotional turmoil from those who rise above it. It is the difference between constantly wondering what someone else is thinking versus directing that mental energy toward your own growth. It is the difference between waiting for an apology that may never come versus becoming someone who no longer requires one. It is the difference between seeking validation from another person versus becoming so focused on your own journey that their validation is irrelevant. When you create, you no longer have time to react. You do not have time to overanalyze someone's silence, to decipher their mixed signals, to wonder if they still care. You are too busy transforming, too busy evolving into someone who is not looking back. And this is where the real psychological shift occurs. Because the moment they realize you are no longer emotionally tied to them, they begin to feel something they never expected: uncertainty. People assume they will always have a place in your mind. They assume their absence will leave a gap, that you will always be waiting, hoping, or affected in some way. But when they see that your life is not just continuing without them, but thriving, when they see that your focus is no longer on what they are doing, but on what you are building, it creates an unfamiliar dynamic. They were expecting to still matter, to still occupy space in your thoughts. Instead, they are met with something they never considered: a version of you that no longer needs them in any capacity. This is not about making someone miss you. It is not about playing mind games or trying to manipulate their perception. It is about stepping so fully into your own purpose that their presence or absence becomes irrelevant. When you start pouring your energy into your personal development, your career, your passions, your physical and mental well-being, you shift the power back where it belongs, to you. Most people make the mistake of using silence as their only strategy. They think if they just stop reaching out, if they just disappear for long enough, the other person will come back. But silence without growth is meaningless. If you are still the same person when they return, if you are still emotionally stuck, still seeking their validation, still craving their attention, the most powerful transformation happens when you do not just remove yourself from the situation, but use that time to become someone entirely new. This is why self-investment is the most powerful strategy of all. It is not about revenge, not about proving anything to anyone. It is about redirecting all the energy you once gave to someone else and using it to build a life so fulfilling that you no longer care whether they notice or not. And paradoxically, that is what shakes them the most, because people expect to be missed. They expect their absence to be felt. But when they realize that their presence was never essential to your growth, it forces them to reevaluate everything they assumed about you. When you start creating instead of reacting, you tap into a level of power that most people never reach. You stop waiting. You stop wondering. You stop letting someone else's actions dictate your emotional state. Instead, you become the kind of person who moves forward relentlessly, who invests in their own success, who evolves to a point where the past is no longer relevant. And when that happens, you do not just change your own life, you change the way people see you forever. When you operate from a place of self-mastery, you no longer seek validation from external sources. You no longer chase people, seek their approval, or allow their behavior to dictate your emotional state. This shift in mindset is one of the most powerful transformations you can undergo because it removes the control that others have over you. When someone expects you to react and you do not, it leaves them unsettled. When they expect you to chase and you refuse to, it makes them question their own worth. And when they assume you are still emotionally tied to them, only to find out you have moved on without hesitation, it forces them to reevaluate everything they thought they knew about you. People crave validation. They want to feel important, desired, and significant in someone else's life. This is why the moment you withdraw your attention, not just physically, but emotionally, they begin to feel something they never anticipated, a sense of loss. But this only works when you truly let go, when you genuinely detach from their opinion of you, from the need to be acknowledged, from the desire for them to see your worth. When you master emotional detachment, you become an enigma. Someone who cannot be controlled, manipulated, or guilt-tripped into giving energy where it is not reciprocated. Most people struggle with detachment because they mistake it for coldness or indifference. But detachment is not about being heartless. It is about being in control. It is about choosing where your energy goes, about refusing to invest in situations that drain you, about recognizing that your value does not diminish just because someone else fails to see it. When you detach, you reclaim your power. You stop waiting for apologies, explanations, or validation. You stop replaying the past, wondering what went wrong or questioning your own worth. Instead, you redirect all of that energy into yourself, into your growth, your goals, your evolution. The truth is, people only appreciate what they fear losing. When they sense that your attention is slipping away, when they realize they no longer occupy your thoughts, it triggers something deep within them. Because human nature thrives on certainty. People like to know where they stand in your life. They take comfort in the idea that you still care, that you still think about them, that if they ever wanted to return, you would still be there. But when you remove that certainty, when you become someone they can no longer predict, it creates discomfort. It makes them wonder. And in that wondering, they begin to feel the absence of what they once took for granted. This is why the most powerful response is no response at all, not out of spite, but out of sheer focus on your own life. When you no longer react, when you no longer seek closure, when you no longer attempt to prove anything, you become untouchable. And that is what disturbs people the most. They expected you to wait. They expected you to reach out. They expected you to stay emotionally invested. But instead, you become someone who is too busy building, too focused on their own journey, too detached from old emotional wounds to even care whether they notice or not. The irony of emotional detachment is that the more you pull away, the more they feel drawn toward you. Because people are wired to seek what they can no longer have. They chase after what is slipping away. They suddenly realize the value of what they ignored. And while their confusion grows, you remain steady, unmoved, unbothered, and completely in control of your own path. This is when the real power shift happens. Because now, for the first time, they are the ones questioning, overanalyzing, and feeling the weight of your absence. Most people do not truly grasp the concept of detachment because they still secretly hope for a reaction. They think if they stay silent, the other person will come running back. But true detachment means letting go of that expectation entirely. It means not caring whether they return, not needing them to notice, not seeking to prove anything. It is the realization that your energy is too valuable to be wasted on anything that does not align with your growth. It is understanding that your peace is more important than someone else's recognition of your worth. When you master detachment, you break free from the cycle of emotional dependency. You stop needing external reassurance. You stop craving acknowledgement from those who never appreciated you in the first place. Instead, you cultivate an inner peace so strong that nothing outside of you can shake it. And that is what truly makes you powerful, not because you are trying to prove anything, but because you have nothing left to prove.